Okay, my process of troubleshooting that was actually to delete the Twitter component here, re-add the Twitter component, and re-add the same consumer key and the same consumer secret. After I entered the consumer key, I hit the enter key. After I hit the consumer key, secret, I hit the enter key. These properties sometimes don't register with the component unless you hit the enter key. So now this works as expected. We're going to go to the blocks editor and we're going to say restart the app on the device. We know that when the app starts, it should ask us to authorize a Twitter account. And it should say that my company, jtyler.com, and the app, which is Tutorial2, is asking to be authorized. So let's watch here. Our application is starting. It should direct us to a WebView component where we're actually seeing Twitter ask us for authorization. There we go. So it wants us to authorize. So we're actually going to use Tutorial2's account. Tutorial2, see if I can remember the password. Tutorial, and we're going to say allow. Yeah, no, don't remember that, browser. So all done. You can now use this application with Twitter. You may revoke access later. So if we hit the back button, we're back here to Tutorial running. So now, what do we get if we request this friend timeline? So we'll do it. We'll request the friend timeline, go back to here and see what happens. Nothing came back from the result. We see null there. So there's nothing from the friend timeline. So I'm going to go generate something under the friend timeline with my TweetDeck for my actual JW Tyler account. App Inventor is the Gutenberg press of the mobile revolution. Nice hyperbole statement there. Not sure why we crashed the device. Maybe this clock timer here. Now see if we generate anything on the timeline. Meanwhile, let's handle another event. So we're going to go back here. What's another event? Direct messages. We know we want to receive direct messages and display direct messages. What I'm trying to show you is the format that the timeline comes in and the direct messages comes in. We can't actually just raw dump it. We can, but it's not terribly readable, which we're going to see in just a second, hopefully. We're going to go back to our block editor, and we're going to say in the direct message display, we want to set that text. Oh, great, my TweetDeck is running now. I'll turn that off. So we're going to display messages here. Kill TweetDeck. This is real live development here, guys. Now, when is that going to fire off? Well, let's go to the Twitter and direct message received. So whenever a direct message is received, set the text to messages. So there we go. Let's go back here. Now, why is this asking for this again? Well, in screen 1 initialize, all we have going on is definitely this clock timer here doing this. We're going to deactivate it for right now so it doesn't crash the app. Now, all the screen 1 initialize does is go, hey, authorize this app. It doesn't ask if it has been authorized. So every single time our app starts, it's going to authorize. That's not behavior we want at all. So we need to do something to say, hey, are you authorized? Well, we know we can ask questions with control blocks. So we're going to say if. No, actually, we're going to call the Twitter check authorized. We'll call that. That's going to generate an event is authorized. So if authorized is generated, it means it is authorized, that this is already authorized. So the question is, how do we authorize only if it's not authorized? So if Twitter is authorized, is generated, we're going to set the variable var is auth to true. And we're going to check. The question pops into my mind right away is if we check the var is auth variable this soon, how soon is Twitter going to be able to return that this is authorized? So this might come back to bite us. We might have to change this. So if the variable auth is true, then enable clock 1 timer. Timer enabled to true. For that to work, of course, we need to get the clock timer in here and change it to no, it's not enabled. We're going to make this every 120,000. Make that every 2 minutes. There. Every 2 minutes that clock will fire. Go back to the blocks editor. Alright, so we're going to back off here. And we're going to use the right click do it on check authorized to watch our variable and see if it comes back as true. We know we authorized it, so it should come back eventually and say true. Not happening yet. Let's try again. Still watching our authorized variable. And now I'm thinking this only is going to be populated after we call the authorize. I'm thinking that event is only generated after we call this variable. So let's try that. We'll say do it. That's going to pull up the web view here, ask us to authorize. So we'll gladly put in our information. In theory. There we go. Okay, so we're going to reauthorize here. We're going to say username is tutorial 2. We're going to say the username is tutorial. Say allow. Now let's check our variable. Still not showing true. Twitter 1 is authorized. Should set that variable to true. There. Just kicked over to true. So now it's true. So now we can ask this question. It probably should be an if else. Because if it is if it is authorized already, then we need to kick over and just start the application. So let's do that real quick. Control if else. So if it's true, then just go ahead and enable that clock and timer. Otherwise, call Twitter Authorized. Now, the problem we have is when this application resets, that variable is going to get wiped. So we know we're going to have to use TinyDB to keep local settings. So I'm going to go back over here, use TinyDB. I'm going to grab my TinyDB and I'm going to tell screen with the is authorized to store under the variable is, or under the tag is auth. I'm going to tell it to store the value true, and then when screen 1 initializes, I'm going to load that content into that variable. And we stored it under isAuth. So when our program first starts, it goes, hey, get the contents out of the database that's stored under isAuth. Well, crap, we happen to know that if that's a null value, our program's going to crash. So we need another if statement. So we're going to grab an if statement real quick. And we're going to say, well, only do that if the contents of isAuth is not equal to a null value. How do we do that? We use that awesome not block. So if the contents of TinyDB to get value is not null, then not that. Go ahead and load the contents of isAuth tag. Then we can ask the question about that variable. Is that var isAuth variable true? If it is true, start the timer. If it's not, then call Twitter Authorized. Hey, now we're bridging with steel. All right. And we're going to get rid of our first instinct, which was to check authorized. We're not worried about that right now. We're going to get rid of this block here. We think we're cool on screen 1 initialize. So we're kind of muddling our way through. Slowly but surely, we're building up our blocks here. And we're going to go back to our design goal of wanting to display our timeline. We know we're authorized now. So we're going to say, hey, get the, where's the request from timeline? Here we go. It's supposed to be going when this clock goes, which we disabled. We'll reactivate that clock. We'll go ahead and fire it right now. Do it. Go back here and say, look at that. There we go. So there's our timeline from our friends, but wow, that really is not friendly. We've got all kinds of weirdness going on here. If you're familiar with App Inventor, you can tell that we've got a list here because of the parentheses. Lists are really handy. Lists are easy to break up. We can actually break a list up and format it using a for each. So, my goodness, we're going to have to do a for each to format this. So let's go back here. So when the friend timeline is received, we're going to take that timeline and we're going to use a for each. And we're going to say for each item in the timeline, which is a list. We know it came back as a list, so we know we can use it in list. We're going to do something. So for each item there, we're going to set the label timeline display text to, we're going to use a make text blocks. And we're going to place the contents currently loaded in the variable. A quick little explanation of what for each does. It takes every item in a list and loads each item one at a time into this temporary variable. What we're going to do is each time it does that, we're going to place the timeline display text with that variable. But if we were to just do this right here, it would erase what it placed in it last time. So we actually need to concatenate the current contents of the label with the next contents of the label. The way we do that is just using the label, whoops, can't type in the dark here, label timeline display text value, and then we're going to put in a new line character, and then next item. So here's what this does. For every item in the timeline, it takes that item and adds it to what is already in that label, no matter what it is. Okay? So let's see what that looks like if we actually do that. We're going to pull this up here. So we're going to send that request again for the timeline. Let's do some shifting around here. Let's say show these windows side by side, and then we're going to get rid of that one and get rid of that one. We'll pull this over here. That way we can do it and see it while it happens. Okay. Here we go. We're going to go request the friend timeline. Do it. It's going to send the request. The request should come back, be placed in this timeline, be processed by the for each, and formatted into this label. Let's see what happens here. The Jeopardy music plays. Not happening yet. So, might be getting ahead of myself, but I'm going to troubleshoot by looking at the contents of that variable there. It's getting messy. So I'm going to say collapse all these stupid blocks, organize all these stupid blocks, and then I'm just going to pull out the one I'm working on, which is the timeline receive. Much better. So now I can look at, oops, not what I wanted to do. We're going to watch that block. See what happens here. Where's that request? That request is coming from here. We're going to do it again. Request that timeline. Well, we can see that variable process, that certainly did not show up in our label. So let's look at our syntax here. When the friend timeline is received, set the label timeline display text to whatever's in it. Oh, I know what's wrong. Well, for one thing, we're going to disable, we're going to make virtual screen 2 not visible for right now while we're setting this up. So there you can see there's a lot more information in there. I've been adding to and adding to and adding to that label. It's been growing progressively. So we need to clear it out to test it. So we're going to use that block right there. So we copied and pasted that block. I'm going to use a blank text. Just leave it sitting out here for troubleshooting. When I do that, it'll clear it. That way, now I can send a request to a blank and see if this is working. So the request went out, there it processed it. What does it look like? Well, it says Google Maps, so there is one message. Now here's the next message. So it's still not pretty. You know, it's still not easy to tell which message is which. So I'm going to go back here and say, maybe I need, whoops, not that. I'm going to copy the couple blocks here. I'm going to stop watching that block. Put 2 new lines in there. Try to separate them a little bit. See what it looks that time. So I've got this block. This is just a troubleshooting block right here. I'm going to clear that label again. So you see that label gets clear. Request the timeline again. Come back in. There it goes. That's a little more readable. But once again, there's more on my timeline than I can actually read. So I need some sort of logic here that says only display a certain number or allow it to be scrollable or something. Because this isn't terribly, I can't see here. This starts at the top and goes to the bottom. We can see the very last message is from me. Quick's the word, sharp's the motion. I'm not sure why I posted that to my Twitter timeline, but I did. So we need to do something here. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to say, how about if I make the screen 1 component scrollable? We're just shooting from the hip here. Let's see what happens. Well, that certainly fixed that. We can scroll there. So that would be one way to solve this problem, is to have this just grow and grow and grow. I really don't like that idea. I need some sort of logic. I need to be able to cut some amount of this off. So I know how I can do it. I can use some of the built-in tools here, such as text tools, such as length right here. We determine how many characters is too many, and we'll only display. The other thing that we could do is using lists. We know that those messages come in as lists. We could say, how long is the list? Well, I like the idea of concatenating it not by characters, but by messages. And we know that each item in that list, that incoming list, is a message from the timeline. So I'm going to use that. So I know I'm going to use this, but how am I going to use it? Well, we're going to be asking a question, obviously. So I'm going to go to Control. I'm going to say, I'll probably be using it in if-else. So I'm going to say, probably using equal. I'm going to ask a question here. If the length of the list is equal, greater than. What list? Well, that timeline is the list we're working with in the timeline received. If it's greater than 10 messages, then do what? Only select the first. See, which of these is the first? This is an older message. I did that this morning. This is a newer message. What I'm trying to decide is whether I want to trim the top or the bottom of the list. I'm not sure. I need to see that whole list. So because I need to see that whole list, I'm just going to use a quick variable. I'm just going to let it be variable. And I'm going to text, remove that. Probably be a confusing way to do this. Nope, that's not what I want to do. Yeah, let's rename this so it's not confusable. We'll call this temp variable. I want to say temp variable to timeline. I'm going to snap that in here. First thing, I'm going to request the timeline. What's going to happen is then I can watch this. Here, I'm going to grab a hold of it. So now I can see which way is which on this list. Well, it looks like index position 1 would be this here. Index position last would be this one here. Right? Yeah, I believe so. Another way we can double check that is go to Tutorial 2's Twitter page here. Let's see. Yeah, the most recent in their timeline is that Google Maps message 55 minutes ago. So, number 1 is the most recent message. So, now we can build the logic. First, we're going to delete this variable. everything related to it. That was just a little troubleshooting step for us. Delete that. Delete that. So if the length is longer than 10, then only how are we going to trim it? Well, we'll have to use a separate variable, won't we? So we're going to have to call var trim timeline. Oops, can't define it like that. First we have to define a variable and then call it var trim timeline. We're going to place this in here. That way we know it's a list. We're not going to make it a list though. Instead, we're going to say if it's greater than Okay, so what I've done here is a little bit clumsy. It could be done with a procedure, it could be trimmed differently, but for the sake of time, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say if the timeline is longer than 10 items, if the length of the list is longer than 10 items, then only deliver the first 5 to me. In fact, we're going to change that down to 5. If it's longer than 5, only deliver the first 5 to me from this specific list. So we're going to add add items to list. From where? From timeline. We'll copy that 5 times. So, selected list item. So here, add items to a list. If the length of the timeline list is greater than 5 items, then add items to the var trim timeline from that timeline, but only the first 5 items. And we're going to use the number 1, and then the number 2, then the number 3, and then the number 4, and then the number 5. So here's what will happen. When that timeline is received, if there's more than 5 items, the var trim timeline will be populated with the first 5 items of that list. Otherwise, just do this for each. And this for each was where we just took the timeline and we populated it through. We need another for each that does much the same thing. So we're just going to copy it, except it's not going to use the same var, and it's not, yeah, it is going to use that. It's going to use, instead of timeline, it's going to use the trimmed timeline, which we call var trim timeline. And it's going to take the text, put 2 new lines in var 1. So here's what's going to happen when the timeline is received. If it's greater than 5 items, it's going to trim it and place it in the trim timeline list, and then it will process it with the for each and place it in the label. Now, if it does that every couple of minutes, that's going to make a mess because it'll just keep growing anyway. So I'm going to grab this label here that I was troubleshooting, this block here that I was troubleshooting with, which clears the display label. And I'm going to say each time we do this, we'll clear that and only display, so we're only displaying the last 5 messages. Does this work? I don't know. Let's try it. So I'm going to collapse all the blocks. This is what's processing right here. This we created. So here's the timer that's going to do it. We're going to say do it. Oh, it doesn't look like it's working, does it? Let's think about this. If it's greater than 5, we take timeline, we create a new list, see if there's anything in var trim timeline. Yep, it's all in there. So something's wrong with the display. This always happens when I copy a for each, I swear. Maybe we're clearing the screen at the wrong point. Yeah, we are. We're going to do that when a new one is received, no matter what. So we're going to request the timeline again. It's definitely the last 5. Why these weren't called, I don't know. Try it again. Request the timeline. There, did it? It did not clear the stupid label. Two, 3, 4, 5. Way too many items here. Seeing these items multiple times. Oh, we didn't clear our variable. So we have to do that too. So we want to clear our trim timeline. It's late. I should have just done this automatically, but it's late after a hard day. Okay, so if our trim timeline gets cleared, oops, and then the date label gets cleared. So let's try it again. We're going to request the timeline. When it comes in, it should only give us the first 5 items. What? You know what? When it's a list and you clear it like that, it gets angry every time you try to place a list in it. I'm not sure whether that's a bug or a feature. The reason for that, oops, it crashed. Close and restart the browser, or wait and see if it starts. Oh, it started, okay. So what was our screen when initialized doing, by the way? It's a good time to review that. Collapse all these blocks. Screen when initialized checks to see if authorization exists. Now, remember, TinyDB only works when you actually have connected. Now, we know this is authorized, so I'm not going to reauthorize. The authorization is stored on the Twitter server, so it should still, everything should work. So we're going to, this is what we're working with right now, timeline received. So we're going to re-authenticate here. And we're going to send requests for the timeline. The timeline should come in if it's more than 5. There we go. Trims to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hey, we got the first 5 messages in our timeline. Hey, this tutorial has gone on too long. It'll have to have a part 2, or you'll have to look at the rest of this tutorial in my upcoming book. In either way, this should get you well on the way to getting your own Twitter app. All right, guys, this has been a long one. I'm going to try to cut it down. Right now, it's almost an hour and a half. See if we can cut it down to 30 to 45 minutes in editing. You guys, have fun with Twitter.